Good morning. When you first come to the spiritual path, to a spiritual way of living, you are seeking. And all of us have been in this same position. At some time or other, we have all sought truth, or we have sought God. Sometimes we were seeking healing, physical or mental or moral or financial. Even while we thought we were seeking these healings, we really were seeking God. We were seeking truth, not knowing it. But in any event, we came to a spiritual path, and we came as seekers. We didn't know it at that time, but we had some rights. We had the right to expect that those we went to in our search had found some measure of truth, of God, of realization. We had the right, though we didn't know it then, to expect that these to whom we went were maintaining their consciousness of truth, were maintaining themselves in a consciousness of truth. In other words, we had the right to expect of our practitioners and teachers a spiritual integrity. When we went to their consciousness, we had the right to find spiritual truth in their consciousness and to find them living in spiritual truth, because they had nothing else to give us but that. Peter says, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I unto thee." Now, what is it that John and Peter had that day at the temple gate? Beautiful. Silver and gold they had none. Place and position in life they had none. All that they had was their spiritual integrity, that is, their abiding in the Word of God, and their letting the Word of God abide in them. In other words, all they had was a consciousness that was, to some extent, lifted above the earthly things. A consciousness in which they were maintaining truth, and in which truth was maintaining them. Then, because the beggar, crippled beggar, entered that consciousness of truth of Peter and John, they were enabled, or rather the beggar was enabled, to leap up dancing, healed. Whenever we have gone to a practitioner or a teacher on the spiritual path, if that practitioner or teacher was maintaining themselves in the Spirit, we received healing, physical or mental or moral or financial, but above all these even, in the degree that these practitioners and teachers were lifted above the things of earth, they could lift us up into some measure of spiritual realization, into some measure of attained spiritual consciousness. Remember, we do not have the power ourselves to lift ourselves. We are always lifted by those who have gone a step beyond us. That is why it is written, "I, if I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto me." But listen, I, if I be lifted up. There's that if again. if I be lifted up, if I am not lifted up in consciousness, if I am not abiding in the Word and the Word is not abiding in me, I cannot lift other men up to spiritual consciousness. Therefore, in going to these practitioners and teachers, if we found them in the Spirit, if we found them abiding in truth, in divine consciousness, if we came to them when they were lifted up above the discords and inharmonies of the earth, we were lifted up. At first we may only have been lifted up to the point of being healed of some discord. But eventually, when we ourselves were sufficiently freed of earth ties, then we could be lifted up by their state of consciousness into the divine, into the spiritual. Therefore, there was a responsibility upon every person thinking of themselves as practitioner or teacher, or any person thinking of themselves as on the spiritual path. There was a responsibility that they must recognize, and that is that they must maintain themselves high in consciousness. There are many ways of doing this. We do it through our spiritual reading or through the hearing of the spiritual word. We hear it, we attain it by our meditations. We attain it where two or more are gathered together in spiritual oneness. We maintain it when there are 10 righteous men in a city meeting together. We maintain ourselves spiritually by not reacting to the appearances in the world and permitting ourselves to be dragged down by them. Now, at 10:45 on Sunday mornings, wherever I am, and with whatever group of students I am, there are Infinite Way students on 5 continents, nay, on 6 continents, and on many islands, attuning themselves to us, attuning themselves to our state of consciousness. They know, although it may be 10 o'clock at night in London, or it may be 4 o'clock tomorrow morning in some other place, they know that regardless of what time it is where they are, they're aware that it is 10:45 here. And they are awake and they are attuned. Now, they cannot attune themselves to our bodies or to our pocketbooks, because our bodies and our pocketbooks are of no interest to them. We could also say to them, silver and gold have I none, and if I had, I'm not going to give it to you. But such as I have, you are welcome to enter my spiritual household and to partake of it. Now then, what are they going to meet when they enter our spiritual household? Remember, they're not merely thinking of me as a person. They are thinking of you, the students of the Infinite Way. They are thinking of you as constituting the 2 or more that are gathered together. They are thinking of you as the 10 righteous men in a city, and so they are attuned to the entire consciousness of this room. The question is, do you recognize your responsibility to them? For now I am telling you about your responsibility to Infinite Way students all over this globe. Later you will see that being responsible to that responsibility, you are not only a blessing to the Infinite Way students, but to anyone, to everyone who may be reaching out to God. Because in reaching out to God, whether or not they know it, they are reaching out to the God consciousness of those individuals who have it. You know, of course, that the divine consciousness is always manifested as individual being. In other words, there is no divine consciousness floating around in the air. The divine consciousness is made manifest as the consciousness of an individual or the world of individuals. In other words, the woman who broke through the throng to touch the hem of the robe did not break through a throng to touch anybody's robe, but the Master's robe. Why the Master out of all that throng? Because he was the one in whom and through whom the divine consciousness was reaching the earth. Therefore, divine consciousness functioning as his individual consciousness was available to anyone who reached out to touch it. The Hebrews had been praying for probably centuries for their freedom from Pharaoh, and not all the divine consciousness in the world could save them until divine consciousness was made manifest through the consciousness or as the consciousness of Moses. Then, the moment one individual allowed himself to be a transparency for the divine consciousness, the entire Hebrew people were enabled through that one individual consciousness to find their freedom. There was a widow, a poor widow. She saved her son from slavery. She demonstrated the infinity of her supply, not through some unknown God, not through some unknown divine consciousness, but through the God consciousness made manifest as the individual consciousness of Elijah. Study the scriptural or mystical literature of the world and discover that every great religious teaching had its origin through the consciousness of one individual. And yet in every case the individual said, as the Master did, I of my own self can do nothing. It is only as I am a transparency for the Father within that these works are done. And so it is. These people all over the world who are reaching out to God are never going to find a God in space. And unless they find God as the consciousness of individual being, they are not going to find God at all. And therefore, everyone who knows this truth has a responsibility. And that is the responsibility of remembering, what does a stranger find if he enters my consciousness? What does a person in prison, a person in the hospital, find when they reach out to God? A blank space with no answer? Or can they find my consciousness and find that I am a transparency through which God can reach them? So it is. It is by no accident that on all continents and in so many islands there are Infinite Way students. This happens only because everywhere people are reaching out for safety, for security, for peace on earth, for healing, and they do not realize that these things never can be attained or achieved unless they touch the consciousness of someone who is abiding in the Word and letting the Word abide in them. There is no such thing as peace on earth except the peace that the Hebrews find through Moses, that the Christians find through Jesus, that the Buddhists find through Buddha. There must be individual consciousness attuned to God. There must be individual consciousness setting aside some periods of the day to forget their own problems, their family problems, their nation's problems, in order that they may rise above the earth plane into a state of divine consciousness whereby they become a transparency through which God reaches the earth. If you know that every Sunday morning at 10:45 when you meet, regardless of who is sitting on the platform, regardless of who is conducting the Infinite Way meeting, if you know that at that moment there are people all over the world tuning in to your group consciousness, you will realize your responsibility to check all of your troubles at the door before you come in. Check your human responsibilities, check your human pains, check all of those things that concern you, leave them outside. And when you come into the room, the study center, wherever you may be, attune yourself with God. Spend your hour or hour and a quarter forgetful of your own problems and in attunement with God. Abide in some word of God and let some word of God abide in you. Contemplate some passage of truth. I can frankly say to you that if you do not hear a word that is spoken from the platform, you will lose nothing. If you are lost in the contemplation of some spiritual truth, if you are losing yourself in the contemplation of some spiritual idea or activity. There is a passage that has meant much to me individually, not only in the development of my own life, but in the unfoldment of the entire message of the Infinite Way, and it is one that I share freely with students, and I would like to use it as an illustration of what I mean. The Master had been talking to the woman at the well of Samaria. He talked so long he forgot his luncheon. And when the disciples came and realized that he hadn't eaten, they asked, "Shall we go to the city and get you some meat?" And he made a stranger reply to them as he previously had to the woman. He said, "I have meat the world knows not of." Before that, he had offered water to the woman, but he had no bucket. And naturally, her answer was, "How can you give me water? You haven't a bucket to draw with." "Oh yes, I can give you water, living waters, and I have meat the world knows not of." This passage, "I have meat that the world knows not of," when contemplated, eventually when understood, is sufficient to lift anyone out of mortal sense into divine consciousness, is sufficient to change the entire nature of one's life on earth is sufficient to transform lack into abundance, sickness into health. The reason is, it is an acknowledgement of truth. To human sense, every one of us lacks something, and everyone is aware of their lack. Surprisingly enough, the little bit that we lack is no comparison to that which we already have. And yet, instead of abiding in the awareness of what we already have, we take that for granted, and we magnify and multiply that which we have not by giving it our thought, our attention, our prayers. When we turn from the little that we have not and start to ponder the abundance of that which we have, we discover many, many miracles. Probably the first one that pops into my thought is, I have life. Many, many years ago, Alan Boone said, to know that you have life is 99% of the battle. It's very comforting to know that you have life. Life is God. If you have life, you have God. If you have God, what more would you like? Again, it has been said that if you had God and everything else in the world, you would have nothing more than if you had only God. Truly, God is infinite. God is all-inclusive. God embodies all that there is. And when an individual discovers that they have God, they likewise discover they have no other needs. To know God aright is life eternal. To have the understanding that God constitutes our very life makes it evident that we are already eternal and immortal. We don't even need food as we think we do to maintain our immortality. Abiding in this truth that I have meat the world knows not of, I have water, I have wine, I have the bread of life. Abiding in this, I soon discover I have everything needful to my unfoldment without taking thought for my life, or what I shall eat, or what I shall drink, or wherewithal I shall be clothed. When I abide in the truth that I have meat, my consciousness is this meat. Myself is this meat. I am the bread, the meat, the wine, and the water. I embody within my consciousness, within myself, the infinite allness of God. This enables me to remember, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Right now, I am in God and God in me. I am abiding in the allness of God, and the allness of God is abiding in me. I am one with the infinite source of life, of truth, of love. I am one with the infinite storehouse of this entire universe. And just remember, as I am abiding in this truth, everyone around the globe who is reaching out to the consciousness that is in this room is coming into this consciousness of abundance, is coming into this consciousness of life eternal, is coming into this consciousness of spiritual truth, of spiritual love, of spiritual life, not human affection. We have that, but it doesn't bless anyone except the few individuals who share in that human affection. But we are filled with the spirit of divine love because of our recognition that I have the love of God. Now, I have meat. I have God's love abiding in my consciousness. It is filled with it. I have the wine of life, the wine of inspiration, abiding with me, and all those who touch my consciousness are not aware now of a human being. They are aware of this consciousness that is filled with truth and love. And because you are hearing this word, listening to this word, abiding in this word as it is being spoken, you are the 2 or more who are gathered together. You are the 10 righteous men. And therefore, we are a united consciousness. You will notice in the writings that the fact of our numbers is of no importance. It really makes no difference if there are 2 of us here, 10 of us here, or 1,000. The numbers do not increase the degree of our spirituality. What determines the degree of our spirituality is our unitedness in this truth. Therefore, if 2 of us are abiding in spiritual truth, we are that 2 or more gathered together where Christ is in the midst of us. And if there are 1,000 of us here and united, we are still that unitedness, and the fact of the 1,000 does not increase it. It is the fact of the unitedness that increases it. Therefore, think of this. You as an individual sitting in this room, abiding in this consciousness of truth, realizing that God has spoken to you and said, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, that at this very moment your consciousness is filled with the allness of God. Think what is happening to every individual who is now attuned to your consciousness, your friends, your relatives, or the strangers, your friends or the enemies. Those who are attuned, think what is happening to them as they touch your consciousness of abundance, your consciousness of life, your consciousness of love. And therefore, I come back to the subject of responsibility. Just as you, at any time in the 24 hours of the day, may have some need, some problem, some claim, which causes you to reach out to God, to truth, to divine consciousness, you are expecting that somewhere around this globe is at least one individual attuned to God, and that your reaching out to God attunes you to that individual. So your responsibility is, throughout the day and throughout the night, remember that somewhere on earth there are those reaching out to God. And the only hope there is of their reaching God is in their reaching individual consciousness attuned to God. And since you know this truth, there is a responsibility on your shoulder to maintain yourself in the attitude given us by the Master. If you abide in this word, if you let this word abide in you, if you abide in me, Christ, if you abide in this Christ realization, I have meat the world knows not of. I have the divine waters of life. I have divine consciousness. I and my Father are one. Therefore, God consciousness and my individual consciousness is one. I, as an individual, am the transparency through which that divine consciousness is reaching the earth. Think as you abide in that. Many times a day and a few times at night, you become the light of the world. It is true, in the beginning, when this is first pointed out to you, because of the necessity of human living and its pull, you will not remember this 24 hours a day, but there will be many times in the day when you'll be pulled up sharply and reminded that you have allowed yourself to get mesmerized by the things of this earth, and then for a moment or two you lift yourselves above it, and in those moments somebody receives a blessing. As time goes on, you become less and less mesmerized by the earth pull. You remain in the world, but not of it. You continue to do your particular jobs, whether in the home, in business, art, profession, whatever it may be, but you find that you have developed an area of consciousness. Somewhere back here, there is an area that never comes down to earth. There is one little bit of you that never again gets involved in the things of this world. All the rest of you may have problems. All the rest of you may be working out of things, but that one little place in your consciousness is reserved. It remains there all of the time. I and my Father are one. All that the Father hath is mine. The place whereon I stand is holy ground, because I am a transparency through which divine grace reaches this earth. I am in the presence of my Father, and the Father is within me. Always there's a little song back there of reminder, and it is this that the people of the world contact, and because of this find some measure of freedom from their problems. You know, the reason for our discords and inharmonies is, of course, that we are hypnotized to accepting appearances as reality. Every human is the same. No one is different than another. It is only as they abide in the Word that they become less human and more divine, and eventually are able to subordinate their humanness and live more and more and more in the divinity of their being. Now remember, as Paul reminded us, no one may yet claim that they have attained the fullness of the Godhead bodily. No one may yet claim that they are abiding 24 hours of every day in the full and complete realization of their spiritual identity. But forgetting most of earth's problems of the past and even of the present, we are looking forward to a greater attainment of awareness, spiritual awareness, than we have now. But it never will be attained except in proportion to what takes place in our consciousness now. Now is the appointed time. We cannot put off until 10 o'clock tonight spiritualizing our consciousness. That has to be done in this instant. In the same way, tomorrow, when you're so busy about your own affairs, and this has dropped from your conscious thinking, and then all of a sudden it comes back, you cannot say, tonight I'll spend an hour in divine consciousness. No, the moment it comes back, at that very moment, regardless of what else you're doing, regardless of what your body is doing, somewhere in your consciousness there must be a return to this moment of realization. I and my Father are one. Therefore, I have a meat. Then go on about your work again. You have fulfilled yourself. It only takes a few seconds of anyone's time at any given moment to return to the Father's house. This is not a thing that is accomplished in time or space. It is not anything that takes a long time or practice. It takes only the willingness to remember that now, any moment of now, whether it's 10 o'clock tonight, 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, or in the midst of your day's work, At any one of those moments, it is now, because you never live any other time than now. You can't live yesterday, you can't live tomorrow. You are only living now. And if in the now, whenever that now is, that this message returns to your consciousness, that is the moment in which you must quickly realize, I have meat. Silver and gold I may have none, but I have meat, and wine, and water, and bread. I have the spiritual staff of life. In fact, all that the Father hath is mine, all of the Spirit, all of spiritual truth, all of spiritual reality. God is no respecter of persons. There is not any truth that any one person has that I haven't got, but I must make myself consciously aware of it. And of course, that brings us, I suppose, as must inevitably happen, to the key word of the entire message of the infinite way. And that key word is consciousness. The entire ministry of the infinite way, the entire message of the infinite way, is based on that one word and all that it implies. Nothing can happen to you, through you, or by you, except as an activity of your consciousness. Your consciousness is the avenue through which everything happens to you, through you, or by you. If you do not open your consciousness to a thing, it cannot happen. In other words, you could not be here in this room now unless your consciousness had been opened to an interest in what would take place here. And remember this, you yourself may not consciously know how you got here or why, but I'm telling you that within you, your consciousness was open to truth. You will never open a Bible or a book of truth unless first your consciousness has awakened to its need for the Bible or a message of truth. God can never enter your consciousness until your consciousness acknowledges a need of God. Somewhere within ourselves, something takes place. When I say within ourselves, again, what is the self if not consciousness? Something takes place within our consciousness that opens us to something or somebody. The woman that went through the throng recognized that the Master was a transparency for God, was spiritual. Peter recognized that the Master was the Christ, was a transparency for the activity of God. Always there must be some recognition. I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of Israel. Always consciousness must open and say, I need God, I have God, I want truth. Then all the rest takes place in the outer realm. Even without knowing what book of truth is ours or that we require, the moment we are open to the fact that we need truth or want it, the right book is placed in our hand. Someone gives it to us, someone leaves it on a bus seat, we're led to a library shelf. In one way or another, the moment our consciousness is open to truth, truth has a way of finding entrance into our consciousness. So it is that whereas in the beginning you are aware of a lack of truth, a lack of God, a lack of life, a lack of health, and by opening your consciousness you make a way for it to reach you. Eventually, as you remain on the spiritual path, You learn a great secret. You always had God. You always had truth. You always had life eternal. You always had infinite substance, infinite supply. But your consciousness had been closed to it. You say, oh no, not about supply. No. My consciousness has always been open to receive money. But money isn't supply. Yes, the consciousness that was open to money was closed to supply. The consciousness that thought it was open to receiving good was closed to receiving good. Because consciousness is only open to supply when it is open to the Spirit. For the Spirit is the only supply there is. Money and its other forms are merely the outer expression of an invisible substance. You remember the morning we had this illustration of the Hindu master who sent his disciple out for a fruit, a piece of fruit. And he had the disciple cut open the fruit and asked what was in it. A seed. Well, now cut open the seed and see what's in it. And he cut open the seed and he said, nothing. Nothing is in it. And the master said, it can't be. Can't be, because out of nothing there couldn't come a seed and a tree and fruit. There has to be something in that seed. It's there. You can't see it. It's life. It's God. That's what is the center, the invisible center of all that is. For everything that is made was made of the substance of things which are not seen. Therefore, invisible to your eyesight is the substance of which money and securities and properties are formed. But be assured, money can't make itself, securities can't make themselves, properties can't make themselves, nor can they deliver themselves to your door. It is the activity of an invisible something in your consciousness, and that something is truth. Therefore, once you recognize this truth, I and my Father are one. Here where I am, God is, and all that the Father hath is mine. Therefore I have meat. I am constituted of wine and bread and water. I embody the very activity of resurrection. I embody the very Christ that restores the lost years of the locust. I embody that. I do not go to holy mountains to seek it. I do not go to holy temples to seek it. I might go to holy teachers to have them reveal to me. They haven't got it. They merely reveal its presence within me. The word omnipresence would mean nothing if it didn't mean that where you are, the presence of God is. Not merely where Jesus is, or Paul, or John, or Moses. Not merely where spiritual teachers are is the presence of God, but omnipresence means present where you are. Present where you are is God. But if you don't open your consciousness to admit that, it can never be to you. It can be to your neighbor, but not to you. You have to open your individual consciousness and acknowledge that the temple of God I am. I am the temple of God. My body is the temple of God. My consciousness is the temple of God, and the presence of God is within me. And the presence of God is the health of my countenance. There can be no health of my body if there isn't an invisible presence of God, which makes itself manifest as this form and as the harmony of this form. There can be no supply in my life if there isn't an invisible substance, an invisible life at the center of my being, which is the substance of my supply. Yes, we all have that, but we lack one thing. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Acknowledge him in all thy ways. If you do not acknowledge, if you do not open your consciousness to this truth, the presence that is within you is not functioning. If you do not abide in the Word and let the Word abide in you, you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth. In other words, your own consciousness is the source, the seat, the center of your life. What you admit in consciousness, that you manifest in the outer. Let us go back for a moment to the Master in the 5th chapter of Matthew. When you pray, pray in secret. Go into your inner sanctuary, pray in secret, and the Father that seeth in secret will reward thee openly. Now here's the secret of prayer. The things you mouth with your words, that you mouth through words, this is not prayer. Prayer is what takes place in your consciousness in the way of knowing the truth. Now, there's no use speaking this truth for 1,000 people to hear because they can't do anything about you or about your life. They all have affairs of their own to be concerned about. But you close your eyes to man whose breath is in his nostril, to all the people who are around you. Cease ye now from thinking of any man or any source of supply. Cease and pray in secret. Pray how? Know the truth. What truth? I have meat the world knows not of. I have a spring of living water within me. The bread of life, the wine of life, the water of life, the meat of life, even the power of resurrection abides within my consciousness. All that the Father hath is mine. All that God is, I am. Right here where I am is holy ground, for I am the temple of the living God. I am the place where God shines through. God is that invisible activity which appears outwardly as my health. God is that invisible substance and activity of my supply. God is even the invisible cement of my relationships. In the family, in business, in art, profession. Why, my consciousness embodies the very Spirit of God, the presence of God, the love of God, the life of God. Son, all that I have is thine. And remember, this cannot be voiced to anyone until such time as it has become so much a part of your consciousness that you're demonstrating it. Then and then only can you go out to share it, to give it, or to teach it. No matter how much you may see others in lack, don't try to give them this. No matter how much you see them suffering, don't try to give them this. Give them a pamphlet if you like. Give them a book if you like. Turn their thought toward this truth if you like. But be very careful that you do not. All right, let's go back again to the Master. Only now the Master is a babe, a newborn babe. And there's an outside world ready to gobble him up. And so the family are told, take him down into Egypt, into a place of darkness, mystery, secrecy. And keep him there until he's matured. Then you can bring him back. And so, this that you have heard this morning is the babe. It is the Christ, but it is the babe. It is just a seed planted in your consciousness. Live with it. Live with it day and night. I have meat the world knows not of. All that you have heard here today, live with it. Keep it as a prayer, but secretly within you, until it begins to bear fruit, until you know that this idea has become so matured in you that it is a very part of your life. Then, of course, you can go out and give a cup of cold water. Then you can share the Christ that has become matured in you, that is in no danger of being lost by your sharing it. Again, everything that takes place in your life or through your life is going to take place as an activity of your consciousness. You can even prevent accidents taking place in your life by an activity of your consciousness, by knowing the truth that God is the mind of this universe, the intelligence of this universe, and that because of omnipresence, this means that God is the divine intelligence universally, and therefore intelligence and love are expressed everywhere, every time. By this activity of your own consciousness, you change the pattern of the outer life. Now, the pattern of your outer life can only be changed by the pattern of your inner life. You first must have a pattern upon which your life is built, and that pattern is built in your consciousness. And the truths that you know become the harmonies that you manifest. And today we have taken one. I have meat the world knows not of. And secretly and sacredly I'm going to hide that in Egypt, in the deepest, darkest recesses of my consciousness. I'm going to keep it as a precious seed. And by remembering it and acknowledging it often, I'm going to give it its water, its fertilizer, its nurture, whatever it needs for its nourishment. By consciously remembering over and over, I have meat. I have meat. The world knows not of. All that the Father hath is mine. I need not look to man whose breath is in his nostril. That which God hath joined together, no man can put asunder. And I and my Father are one by the will of God. And all that the Father hath is mine by the will of God. And no man can separate this. Neither life nor death can separate me from the care of God. Neither life nor death can separate me from God's life, God's love, God's abundance. Nor can any human circumstance. For I and my Father are one, not two. God's good does not have to reach me. It is embodied in me because of oneness. And so you see that this truth made active in your consciousness becomes the invisible source, substance, and activity of your outer experience. But it does more than this. Just think now what has happened in the lives and experiences of students around the world who have attuned themselves to our united consciousness here this morning. Think of the spiritual truth they reached into. Think of the spiritual love they reached into. And then you'll know the amount of blessings that have gone out from this room, from your consciousness this morning. And then remember that in the degree that you can maintain this, even for brief moments of the day and night, people everywhere reaching out to God receive God's grace through you. Thank you, and we'll be here next week at 10:45.